The White House at 3:52 a.m. is a study in controlled chaos. Secret Service agents move through the hallways with practiced efficiency, their faces grim with the knowledge that their president is about to make one of the most consequential decisions in American history. The Roosevelt administration wing buzzes with activity as senior staff members, many still in pajamas and robes, hurry toward the Situation Room. Trump strides down the corridor, his mind focused on the impossible mathematics of war. 17 American sailors are dead, 34 are wounded. How many more will die if he chooses retaliation? How many will die if he chooses restraint? The Situation Room doors swing open as he approaches. Defense Secretary James Miller stands at attention, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from being roused from sleep. CIA Director Sarah Hayes hunches over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she coordinates with intelligence assets across the Pacific. National Security Advisor John Bolton paces behind the conference table, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. Mr. President, Secretary Miller begins as Trump takes his seat at the head of the table. Here's what we know. The main display screen illuminates with a detailed map of the South China Sea. Red triangles mark Chinese naval positions. Blue squares show American ships. The red triangles outnumbered the blue squares overwhelmingly. The USS Montana was conducting what we call a freedom of navigation operation, or FONOP, in international waters. These operations are routine. We conduct them monthly to ensure that international shipping lanes remain open and that no single nation can claim exclusive control over vital waterways. Trump studies the map intently. How routine is routine, Secretary Miller? Sir, we've conducted 127 similar operations in the South China Sea over the past 18 months. The Chinese have protested each one diplomatically, but they've never responded with military force. Until tonight, Trump says grimly. Until tonight, Miller confirms, Mr. President, this represents a significant escalation in Chinese aggression. They've moved from diplomatic protests to lethal military action. CIA Director Hayes looks up from her laptop. Mr. President, we're getting real-time intelligence from our assets in the region. The Chinese fleet consists of 12 surface combatants, including 2 Type 052D destroyers and 1 Type 055 cruiser. These are frontline warships with advanced missile systems. And the submarines. 6 Type 093 attack submarines. Sir, they're nuclear-powered and carrying advanced torpedoes. If they achieve optimal firing position, they could potentially sink every American ship in the area. Trump's jaw clenches. What about our capabilities? General Harrison steps forward. Sir, the Theodore Roosevelt carries 64 F/A-18 Super Hornets and 12 F-35C Lightning II fighters. The Carl Vinson has a similar complement. Between the two carrier groups, we have overwhelming air superiority in the region. But, Trump senses there's more. But sir, if we engage, we're looking at a full-scale naval battle. The Chinese have land-based missile systems on their artificial islands that can target our carriers. This won't be a limited engagement. This will be war. The room falls silent. Everyone understands the implications. A shooting war between the United States and China would be unlike any conflict in human history. 2 nuclear powers, 2 economic superpowers, 2 nations with the ability to destroy civilization itself. Trump looks at the clock. 3:55 a.m., 4 minutes left. What are our options? He asks. Bolton speaks first. Mr. President, we have to respond. If we allow China to attack American forces without consequences, every ally in the Pacific will question our commitment. Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, they're all watching to see if America will stand up to Chinese aggression, and if we respond militarily. Trump asks. We crippled their fleet, Bolton says without hesitation. We show them that attacking American forces comes with a price they can't afford to pay. Secretary Miller raises his hand. Mr. President, there's another option. We could withdraw our forces and file a formal protest through diplomatic channels. We could bring the matter before the United Nations Security Council. That's not an option, Bolton interjects. 17 Americans are dead. We don't file protests when our people are killed. Gentlemen, Trump says, his voice cutting through the argument. I need facts, not opinions. Director Hayes, what's President Xi's current status? Sir, Chinese President Xi Jinping is currently in Beijing. Our intelligence indicates he's been in emergency session with the Politburo Standing Committee for the past hour. They're undoubtedly debating their next move. What about their nuclear posture? The room falls silent again. This is the question everyone has been dreading. General Harrison clears his throat. Sir, there's no indication that China has altered their nuclear readiness status. But Mr. President, if this escalates beyond conventional naval warfare, he doesn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knows that China possesses approximately 350 nuclear warheads and the delivery systems to reach American cities. Trump stands up and walks to the window overlooking the South Lawn. Outside, Washington, D.C. sleeps peacefully, unaware that their president is balancing the fate of the world on a knife's edge. Mr. President, General Harrison says quietly. We need a decision. The Chinese submarines are almost in position. Trump turns back to the table. Get me President Xi on the phone. The room erupts in surprised voices. Sir, Bolton protests. We don't have time for diplomatic theater. Every second we delay gives the Chinese a tactical advantage. I said get me Xi on the phone now. Mr. President. Secretary Miller checks his watch. We have 2 minutes. Then you better dial very, very fast. The secure communications center adjacent to the Situation Room becomes a hive of frantic activity. Communications officers work desperately to establish a connection to Beijing. The international secure line requires multiple authentication, protocols, satellite coordination, and diplomatic clearances that normally take 30 minutes to complete. Sir, the senior communications officer reports, we're trying to bypass normal diplomatic channels, but the Chinese aren't responding to our priority requests. Trump's frustration boils over. I don't care if you have to wake up every operator between here and Beijing. Give me that call. In the Situation Room, the tension is suffocating. The large display screen shows the real-time positions of naval forces. The Chinese submarines are moving steadily toward optimal firing positions. The American carrier groups are racing toward the combat zone, but they're still hours away. Mr. President, Director Hayes reports, we're intercepting Chinese military communications. They're using encrypted channels, but we're getting fragments. It appears they're coordinating a coordinated attack on our remaining ships in the area. How many ships do we still have in the immediate area? Trump asks. 3 destroyers and 1 cruiser. Sir, about 1,200 American sailors. Trump closes his eyes for a moment. 1,200 American sailors, 1,200 mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sons and daughters, all depending on the decision he makes. In the next 60 seconds, Mr. President, the communications officer calls out, we have Beijing on the line. They're connecting President Xi now. Put it through to the Situation Room, Trump orders. The red phone on the conference table rings once. Trump picks it up before the second ring. Mr. President Xi, this is President Trump. We need to talk right now. Mr. President Trump, comes the reply in carefully measured English. I believe you are calling about the regrettable incident in the South China Sea. Regrettable incident. Trump's voice rises. You killed 17 of my sailors. You fired on American ships in international waters. This isn't regrettable. This is an act of war. There's a pause on the line. Trump can hear muffled voices, speaking rapidly in Mandarin in the background. Mr. President, our naval commanders report that American warships violated Chinese territorial waters. We had no choice but to defend our sovereign territory. That's a lie and you know it, Trump shoots back. I'm looking at GPS data right now. Our ships were in international waters. You know it? I know it, and the whole world is going to know it within the hour. Mr. President, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding about the precise location of the incident. Navigation in these waters can be quite complex, as I'm sure you understand. Trump looks at the clock. 3:58 a.m., 30 seconds left. Xi, here's what's going to happen. I'm tracking 6 of your submarines moving toward my ships. I have 2 carrier groups with 150 fighter jets, ready to turn your entire fleet into scrap metal. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way. But, we're going to do it in the next 30 seconds. Mr. President, surely you do not wish to start a war over what may have been a navigational error. This isn't about navigation, Xi. This is about the fact that you ordered your forces to fire on American ships. Now, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to order your submarines to stand down and withdraw, or I'm going to authorize my naval commanders to engage with full force. The line goes quiet. Trump can hear his own heartbeat in the silence. Around the table, his advisors watch with a mixture of admiration and terror. 15 seconds, Xi. Mr. President, I cannot be seen by my people as capitulating to American pressure. 10 seconds. Perhaps we can reach some form of mutual understanding. 5 seconds. Xi, call off your submarines now. Mr. President Trump, in the interest of avoiding further bloodshed, I am ordering my naval commanders to withdraw their submarines to a safe distance. The Situation Room exhales collectively, but the tension remains thick. Trump places the phone back in its cradle and looks around the table at his advisors. Every face reflects the same mixture of relief and disbelief. Confirm the submarine. Withdrawal, Trump orders. General Harrison speaks into his headset, coordinating with naval intelligence. After 30 seconds, he looks up. Sir, sonar contacts confirm that Chinese submarines are moving away from our ships. They're withdrawing to a distance of approximately 15 nautical miles, and our wounded sailors, medical helicopters are inbound from the Roosevelt, sir. The critically wounded are being evacuated for immediate surgery. Trump nods grimly. I want a full casualty report on my desk within the hour. Names, ages, hometowns, families. I want to know everything about those 17 sailors. I'm going to call their families personally. Mr. President, Bolton interjects, what about our military response? We can't let this attack go unanswered. Trump, fixes Bolton with a steady gaze. We're not going to let it go unanswered, but we're going to be smart about how we respond. He turns to Director Hayes. I want you to declassify and release the GPS navigation data showing our ships were in international waters. Make sure every major news outlet in the world has that data within 2 hours. Sir, that will publicly contradict the Chinese version of events. Good. Let Xi explain to his people why he's been lying to them. Secretary Miller leans forward. Mr. President, what about our military posture in the region? Double our naval patrols in the South China Sea. I want a carrier group permanently stationed there. No more monthly operations. I want a constant American presence. That's going to be seen as escalatory by Beijing, Bolton warns. I don't care how Beijing sees it, Trump replies. They attacked American forces. They're going to see a lot more American military presence in their backyard. Trump stands up and begins pacing again, his mind working through the implications of the night's events. What about our allies? What's their response? Japan is offering military support, Hayes reports. Prime Minister Abe is willing to provide logistics and intelligence sharing. South Korea is putting their naval forces on high alert. Australia is moving ships toward the region, and Taiwan. They're requesting an emergency security consultation, sir. They're worried that if China is willing to attack American forces, Taiwan might be next. Trump stops pacing. Taiwan. The one issue that could turn tonight's crisis into a global catastrophe. Schedule a call with President Tsai. I want to reassure her that America's commitment to Taiwan's security is ironclad. Mr. President, General Harrison says carefully, that's going to send a very strong message to Beijing. It's supposed to, Trump replies. She needs to understand that attacking American forces has consequences. Real consequences. The president returns to his chair and looks around the table. Gentlemen, lady, what happened here tonight doesn't leave this room. The American people don't need to know how close we came to a shooting war with China, but I want all of you to understand something. He pauses, making eye contact with each person in the room. The decision I made tonight, to try diplomacy before military action, that wasn't weakness. That was calculated strength. She blinked first because he knew I was serious about the consequences. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Bolton shakes his head. Mr. President, with respect, some will see this as showing weakness. We were attacked, and we responded with a phone call. John, 17 Americans died tonight. If I had chosen military retaliation, how many more would have died? How many Chinese sailors? How many civilians, if this had escalated to a broader conflict? The room falls silent. Bolton has no answer. The art of the deal, Trump continues, isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about knowing when you've already won and when to stop pushing. 3 hours later, as dawn breaks over Washington, D.C., the world begins to wake up to news of the South China Sea incident. The GPS data released by the CIA shows conclusively that American ships were in international waters when they were attacked. International maritime law experts appear on news programs, confirming that the Chinese attack was unprovoked and illegal. In Beijing, President Xi faces a different kind of crisis. The Chinese people have been told that American ships violated Chinese territorial waters, but the GPS evidence contradicts this narrative. Chinese social media, despite heavy censorship, buzzes with questions about why their government's story doesn't match the technical evidence. Trump sits in the Oval Office, reviewing intelligence reports and casualty notifications. Each of the 17 sailors who died has a story, a family, a future that was cut short by Chinese aggression. Their sacrifice weighs heavily on his mind as he prepares for the most difficult part of his presidential duties. Mr. President, his chief of staff announces, the first family is on the line. Petty Officer Michael Rodriguez's wife. Trump picks up the phone, his voice gentle and respectful. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is President Trump. I want to tell you how sorry I am for your loss, and how proud America is of your husband's service. The conversation lasts 20 minutes. Mrs. Rodriguez talks about her husband's dreams of becoming a career Navy man, about their 2 young children, about the future they had planned together. Trump listens, offers condolences, and promises that her husband's sacrifice will not be forgotten. 16 more calls follow. 16 more families devastated by the night's events. Each conversation reminds Trump of the human cost of the decisions he makes. By noon, the political ramifications begin to emerge. Congressional leaders from both parties demand briefings. Allies request clarification of American policy. The stock market opens sharply lower as investors worry about the implications of increased tension between the world's 2 largest economies. Mr. President, Secretary Miller reports during an afternoon briefing, the Chinese are requesting a face-to-face meeting. President Xi wants to discuss what they're calling recent misunderstandings in the South China Sea. Trump looks up from the intelligence brief he's reading, where they're suggesting Singapore, neutral territory, good security, and symbolic for both sides. Trump considers this. The phone call at 3:58 a.m. was just the beginning. The real diplomacy, the real negotiations, happen face to face. This is where relationships are built or destroyed, where misunderstandings are clarified or conflicts are escalated. What's our intelligence assessment of Xi's position? Trump asks. Director Hayes consults her notes. Sir, our sources in Beijing indicate that she is under significant pressure from hardliners in the Politburo. They're arguing that China appeared weak by backing down to American pressure. She needs to show strength domestically while avoiding further escalation internationally. And what do our allies think? Mixed reactions, sir. Japan and South Korea appreciate that you avoided a shooting war, but they're concerned about Chinese aggression. Australia is taking a wait-and-see approach. Taiwan is nervous about any deal that might compromise their security. Trump stands up and walks to the window overlooking the Rose Garden. Outside, tourists take pictures and children play on the lawn, oblivious to the fact that their president spent the early morning hours preventing World War III. Set up the meeting with Xi, Trump decides. But I want conditions. First, China publicly acknowledges that the incident occurred in international waters. Second, they provide compensation for the families of the sailors who died. Third, they agree to a new protocol for military encounters in the South China Sea. Sir, they're unlikely to agree to all of those conditions, Secretary Miller warns. Then there's no meeting, Trump replies. She wants to save face domestically, but he also needs to prevent this from happening again. He knows that next time, I might not choose diplomacy. 2 weeks later, President Trump sits across from President Xi in a secure conference room in Singapore. The meeting has been months in the making, with both sides carefully choreographing every detail to avoid any perception of weakness or capitulation. The negotiations are intense and complex. She argues that China has legitimate security interests in the South China Sea. Trump counters that international law must be respected and that attacks on American forces cannot be tolerated. Both leaders understand that they're not just negotiating about one incident, they're establishing the framework for U.S.-China relations for the next decade. Mr. President, she says through his translator, China has always respected international law. The incident in the South China Sea was an unfortunate misunderstanding that both sides should work to prevent in the future. President Xi, Trump, replies, I appreciate that you're willing to characterize it as a misunderstanding, but we both know what happened. Chinese forces fired first on American ships in international waters. The question is, how do we make sure it never happens again? The negotiations continue for 12 hours. In the end, they reach a complex agreement that gives both leaders what they need. China agrees to new protocols for military encounters in the South China Sea and provides financial compensation for the families of the deceased sailors. In exchange, the United States agrees to limit its freedom of navigation operations to clearly defined international waters and to provide advance notification of major naval exercises. Most importantly, both sides agree to establish a direct communication channel between their military commanders to prevent future misunderstandings from escalating into violence. As Trump prepares to leave Singapore, he reflects on the events that brought him here. The phone call at 3:58 a.m. seems like a lifetime ago, but the lessons learned that night continue to guide his approach to international relations. Mr. President, a reporter asks during the departure press conference, do you consider this summit a success? Trump considers the question carefully. I think any time you can prevent a war while still defending American interests, that's a success. The families of the 17 sailors who died deserve justice, and I believe we've achieved that. But more importantly, we've established a framework to prevent future tragedies. Some critics argue that you showed weakness by not retaliating militarily against China. Those critics don't understand the art of the deal, Trump replies. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is know when not to use your strength. War is easy. Peace is hard. And peace with honor is the hardest of all. As Air Force One lifts off from Singapore, Trump thinks about the phone call that changed everything. In those crucial 12 minutes, he had to choose between the immediate satisfaction of military retaliation and the long-term stability of peace. He chose peace, but he backed it with strength. The 17 sailors who died in the South China Sea will never be forgotten. Their sacrifice led to a new understanding between the world's two superpowers, an understanding that may prevent future conflicts and save countless lives. But Trump knows that the red phone on his desk could ring again at any moment. The next crisis might not end as well as this one did. The next decision might not have a good option and a bad option. It might have only bad options and worse options. That's the burden of command. That's the weight of being the one person who has to make the impossible choices, who has to gamble with the fate of the world, who has to live with the consequences of every decision. As the plane flies through the night sky toward Washington, Trump closes his eyes and tries to sleep. But in his dreams, he still hears the sound of the red phone ringing at 3:47 a.m. And he knows that sound will stay with him for the rest of his life. The commander's gamble paid off this time. But there will always be another gamble, another crisis, another moment when the world hangs in the balance, and one person has to decide which way it falls. That's the price of power. That's the cost of leadership. And that's the story of the night that almost changed everything.